The low, mournful hum of the UNS Odyssey's inertial dampeners was the only sound in the sterile transport chamber, a constant thrum that vibrated through the soles of Dr. Eris Thorne's polished shoes and up into his very bones. It was a sound he had come to associate with the cold, silent dread of the void. But this was different. This was the sound of an ending. Through the thick, polarized plasteel of the forward viewport, the Star Weaver filled their vision, a vessel so vast and impossibly intricate it defied human comprehension. It wasn't built of metal and rivets. It seemed to be grown from pure, solidified light, a crystalline lattice that captured and refracted the distant light of Sol into a billion shimmering, shifting rainbows. It was beautiful. Terrifyingly so, like a cathedral designed by a god who had never known the constraints of physics or the messiness of life. Eris smoothed the front of his dark blue diplomatic uniform, the fabric feeling flimsy and absurd, a child's costume for a play whose final act was the annihilation of his species. He was a xenolinguist, a historian, a man whose entire life had been dedicated to the quiet, patient work of understanding the other. He traded in syntax and dead languages, in the subtle shifts of cultural paradigms over millennia. His weapons were words, his battlefield the silent archives of forgotten civilizations. Now, he was being sent as humanity's last word, a final, desperate plea thrown into the face of a silent, luminous abyss. Beside him, General Eva Rostova stood rigid as stone, her face a mask of grim determination carved from years of service. Her uniform was crisp, her sidearm a useless but symbolic weight at her hip. She saw an enemy, a target, a problem to be solved through force, and the sheer impossibility of that solution was a poison in her veins. The third member of their delegation, Ilara Vance, a young astropsychologist chosen for her expertise in non-humanoid intelligence, fidgeted with the datapad clutched in her trembling hands. Her job was to build a bridge of empathy. But how could you empathize with a rainbow that could extinguish a sun 5 minutes to docking? The ship's AI announced, its voice calm and devoid of the terror that gripped its 3 passengers. The Lumina have affirmed the docking corridor is stabilized. Rostova grunted, her knuckles white where she gripped the back of a stabilization chair. Affirmed, as if we have a choice but to trust them. Eris watched the Star Weaver grow, its crystalline facets resolving into structures of breathtaking complexity. It was a snowflake the size of a moon, a weapon that killed with beauty. The Lumina. They had arrived without warning 3 weeks ago, their single ship brushing aside the combined might of Earth's defense fleet as if it were swatting away gnats. They didn't broadcast threats or declarations of war. They had sent only one message, translated instantly and perfectly into every language on Earth, a message of serene, horrifying compassion. Your cycle of suffering is over. The great preservation is at hand. Be calm. Your essence will be saved. And so, humanity's last hope was this: a diplomatic shuttle carrying a linguist, a soldier, and a psychologist. A desperate attempt to prove that human essence was more than just a data set to be archived. The Odyssey shuddered gently as the docking clamps engaged. There was no screech of metal on metal, but a soft, harmonic chime that resonated through the hull, as if they were being welcomed into a temple. The airlock hissed, and for a moment, Eris felt a primal urge to scream, to tell the pilot to reverse thrust, to flee back to the flawed, messy, beautifully chaotic world they had left behind. But he held his ground, his fear a cold, hard knot in his stomach. The outer door irised open, revealing not a sterile docking bay, but a cavern of impossible light. The air that washed over them was cool and smelled faintly of ozone and something else. Something clean and ancient, like the air after a thunderstorm in a petrified forest. The walls were not walls at all, but translucent, crystalline structures that pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence. The light shifted and flowed, creating intricate patterns that Eris's mind instinctively tried to interpret as language, as art, as something, anything, familiar, but it was utterly alien. There was no up or down in the conventional sense, only pathways of solidified light that spiraled through the immense chamber. There were no guards, no warriors, only a profound and unnerving silence. A silence that felt older than stars. A figure coalesced from the light before them, its form tall and slender, vaguely humanoid but lacking any defining features. It was a silhouette made of pure, white light, its edges sharp and perfect. "I am the High Lector," it said, its voice not a sound that traveled through the air, but a concept that bloomed directly in their minds. The words were flawless English, yet they carried the weight of an intellect so vast and ancient, it made Eris's own feel like the babbling of a child. "You are the chosen representatives of the species designated humanity. You are welcome." General Rostova stepped forward, her hand resting near her sidearm, a gesture of defiance that seemed utterly pathetic in this place. "We are here to demand you cease your advance and withdraw from our system." The High Lector's form seemed to shimmer, an expression of what might have been amusement. Demand, a fascinating concept. It implies a position of power. Your fleet is scattered. Your planetary defenses are nullified. Your species is in a state of collective panic. From what position do you make this? Demand. Eris stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on the general's arm. "High Lector, we are here to open a dialogue, to help you understand what you would be destroying. We are not just a collection of biological data. We are a species of poets, of artists, of dreamers. We have created beauty. We have wrestled with questions of meaning. We have loved and we have grieved." He gestured with his hands, trying to convey the passion and the chaos that defined his species. To preserve our essence in some cold archive would be to miss the point of our existence entirely. The struggle, the imperfection, that is our essence. The High Lector was silent for a long moment, the light in the chamber dimming slightly. Then, the crystalline wall beside them began to glow, the light within it swirling and coalescing. An image formed, a three-dimensional projection woven from pure light, so real Eris felt he could step into it. It was a city, a place of soaring, elegant towers and graceful flying creatures. The inhabitants were tall, insectoid beings with iridescent carapaces, and they moved with a strange, delicate beauty. He could feel their culture, their art, their history, pouring off the image like a palpable wave. The Cathar. The High Lector's voice filled their minds, a species of profound architectural and social genius. They believed, as you do, that their chaotic, individualistic existence was the pinnacle of meaning. They resisted. We preserved their essence. The image shifted. The beautiful city was now still, empty. The elegant towers were unchanged, but the life was gone. The projection then zoomed into one of the towers, revealing a vast, crystalline library. On countless shelves sat glowing crystals, and within each one, Eris could see a perfect, frozen echo of the Cathar civilization, their art, their music, their philosophies, every thought of every individual, saved and catalogued. The original beings themselves were nowhere to be seen. Their cycle of suffering is over. The High Lector stated, the projection fading, Their art is no longer subject to the decay of time. Their history is no longer at risk of being forgotten. We gave them perfection. We gave them eternity. Elara Vance finally spoke, her voice trembling but clear. You committed genocide. A primitive term. The High Lector replied, well, its form turning towards her. Genocide is born of hatred, of fear. We feel neither. We are not destroying you. We are elevating you. We are freeing you from the pain of existence, from the fear of death, from the agony of choice. We are the ultimate curators, the final librarians of the cosmos. The Lector's form of light glided closer to Eris, and he could feel the immense, cold pressure of its consciousness examining him, peeling back the layers of his mind with effortless precision. He felt his knowledge of dead languages, his understanding of historical patterns, his appreciation for poetry, all being cataloged and assessed. He felt naked, a book being read by its author. You, Eris Thorn. The mental voice was now focused solely on him, a whisper in the core of his being. You are a historian, a linguist. You, more than any of your kind, can appreciate the scope of what we do. You seek to understand and preserve the past. We are the ultimate expression of that desire. The light around them shifted again, and Eris found himself standing not in the crystalline chamber, but in a perfect, light-woven recreation of the great library of Alexandria, a place he had dreamed of his entire life. Scrolls lined the walls and aishaze, and the air smelled of papyrus and dust. This is what we offer. The High Lector's voice echoed around him. Perfection, preservation. The chaos of your world is a fire, and you are the books. We can save the stories, but the pages must be consumed. The illusion faded, and they were back in the chamber, the weight of the Lector's words pressing down on them. We are offering your species a great honor, a place in the eternal archive. General Rostova drew her weapon, the click of the safety seeming impossibly loud in the silence. We will fight you to the last breath. The High Lector's form shimmered again. Your defiance is noted. It, too, will be preserved as a fascinating example of primitive territorial instincts. Then, the being of light turned its full attention back to Eris. But for you, Eris Thorn, we have a different offer. Your mind is uniquely suited to our task. You understand the nuances of your culture in a way we could only approximate. You can guide us. You can ensure that the preservation of humanity is done with the utmost fidelity and care. The offer hung in the silent, luminous air. A proposition so monstrous, it's so seductive. It stole the breath from his lungs. Oversee the archiving of your own species, the High Lector clarified, its voice devoid of emotion. Become the first and last curator of humanity. In exchange, your own consciousness will be allowed to persist, to exist alongside us, to study the archives of 1,000 ascended civilizations for eternity. You will be the sole survivor, the shepherd of your people's memory. Eris stared at the being of light, his heart hammering against his ribs. He saw the faces of his parents, the memory of his first love, the image of children playing in a park, the vast, chaotic tapestry of human life. He thought of the art, the music, the stupid jokes, the pointless arguments, the acts of selfless love and bitter hatred. All of it, everything, reduced to a collection of data points in a crystal. The High Lector extended a hand made of pure, white light. Choose, historian. Help us create a perfect memory of your species, or join them in the silent, imperfect oblivion that awaits. The preservation will proceed regardless. The only variable is the quality of the final archive. The only question is whether humanity's last story will be told by one of its own. The silence that followed the High Lector's offer was a physical weight, heavier and more crushing than the gravity of any star. It pressed the air from Eris's lungs, leaving him gasping in a vacuum of impossible choice. He saw the path fork before him on one side, the shared, defiant death of his species, a final, meaningless shout into the void. On the other, an eternity of lonely godhood, a ghost haunting the mausoleum of his own people. General Rostova broke the spell. A low, guttural sound of pure rage escaped her lips. "You son of a bitch," she snarled, her weapon now aimed squarely at the shimmering form of the High Lector. You dare offer him that." The Lector's form remained placid, unthreatened by the primitive projectile weapon. His potential is wasted in a cycle of decay. We offer him purpose. We offer him a continuation. Rostova's aim shifted almost imperceptibly, her eyes now boring into Eris. The look in them was more terrifying than the Lumina's serene indifference. It was a look of profound, human betrayal. "Thorn, if you even consider this, I will execute you myself as a traitor to the human race. We die together. That is the only choice." Alara Vance, pale and trembling, finally stepped forward, her voice a fragile thread in the immense silence. "High Lector, you misunderstand. The offer itself is an act of violence. You are asking him to perform the ultimate act of disconnection. Our identity, our meaning, is derived from our connection to each other. To sever that is to kill the soul, even if you preserve the mind." The Lector's light pulsed softly, a slow, rhythmic beat. Soul, another fascinating, unquantifiable concept. A ghost in your biological machine. We would preserve that ghost as well. Every memory, every belief that constitutes this soul would be perfectly replicated. Eris finally found his voice, though it felt like it belonged to another man, a stranger speaking from a great distance. "No," he said, the single word cutting through the tension. He felt Rostova's posture relax by a fraction, but he wasn't finished. He looked at the Lector, the curator, the god of endings. "No, I cannot accept, and I cannot refuse. Not yet." He took a step forward, away from the perceived safety of his companions, his hands raised in a gesture of supplication, not surrender. "Your offer is based on a premise I cannot accept, because I do not understand it. You speak of preservation, of perfection. I have seen your projection of the Cathar archive. It is a library of ghosts, a silent, perfect tomb. How can I, a historian, condemn my own people to that fate without truly knowing what it is?" The High Lector's silhouette seemed to tilt, an alien gesture of consideration. "What more must you know? I must see it," Eris insisted, his mind racing, grasping for any thread that could buy them time, that could offer a different path. "Not as a projection. I want to see the archive itself. I want to experience a memory. You claim to preserve the essence of a species. Let me feel the essence of the Cathar. Let me judge the quality of your curation. If I am to be a shepherd, I must first understand the flock and the field." For the first time, a flicker of something new rippled through the Lector's form. It wasn't emotion, but perhaps the logical equivalent of curiosity. The request was novel. No species had ever asked for a tour of their own tomb before the moment of their death. An unusual request. The process of direct sensory immersion can be disorienting for biological minds. "We are a disorienting species," Eris countered, a sliver of his old self, the passionate academic surfacing through the fear. Our entire history is one of grappling with the incomprehensible. Grant me this, and I will give you my answer." The lector paused, the light of the chamber seeming to focus, to concentrate. Eris felt the immense weight of its intellect, considering the variables, calculating the outcomes. Finally, the voice bloomed in their minds again. "Very well, historian. Your request is logical. Curator must be familiar with the collection. Follow." The pathway of solidified light beneath their feet dissolved and reformed, creating a new bridge that spiraled deeper into the heart of the crystalline ship. They walked in silence, Rostova's hand never straying from her weapon, her eyes scanning every surface, no longer looking for a target, but for a flaw, a weakness, anything that was not perfect. Alara walked close to Aris, her mind clearly working, processing the lector's language, its logic, searching for a psychological key. They entered a new chamber, a space so vast it felt like a universe unto itself. Floating in the luminous void were countless crystals, each the size of a human hand, arranged in a spiraling galaxy of memory. Each crystal pulsed with a soft internal light, a captured soul. "The Cathar Archive," the High Lector announced. It glided towards one of the crystals, its light form plucking it from the air without contact. The crystal, a deep, iridescent blue, floated before Eris. "This is the preserved essence of Cathar Prime Artist 7, one of their most celebrated sculptors. We will allow you to experience its final creative act, the carving of the Singing Spire of Cathoria. This memory is considered a pinnacle of their cultural output." Eris hesitated, his heart pounding. Rostova's voice was a harsh whisper at his ear. "Don't do it, Thorn. It's a trick. It'll break your mind." "It's a chance," he whispered back, his eyes locked on the crystal. "It's the only one we have." He looked at the High Lector. "How simply reach out. The archive will do the rest." With a deep breath that did little to calm the storm in his chest, Eris extended his hand. The moment his fingers touched the crystal's smooth, cool surface, the universe dissolved. There was no light, no sound, only a dizzying plunge into an ocean of pure information. He was no longer Eris Thorn. He was Cathar Prime Artist 7. He felt the phantom sensation of 6 slender, multi-jointed limbs, the weight of a chitinous carapace, the world seen through compound eyes that could perceive frequencies of light no human had ever seen. He stood on a balcony of spun crystal, a humming chisel in one of his hands, a massive block of resonant stone before him. He could feel the artist's ambition, the culmination of a life's work. He could access the knowledge of stonework, the understanding of harmonics, the deep cultural imperative to create this spire. He saw the memory of the artist's mentors, felt the echo of its first clumsy attempts at creation. It was all there, every piece of data that constituted the artist's skill and knowledge. He began to work, his phantom limbs moving with a grace and precision that was not his own. The chisel sang as it touched the stone, carving away slivers to create a form of breathtaking beauty. He could feel the logic of the creation, the mathematical perfection of the curves, the scientific application of the resonant frequencies. He was executing a perfect act of creation, but something was missing. Search the data stream for the feeling of joy, the thrill of inspiration, the gnawing fear of failure, the surge of pride as the spire took shape. He searched for the love the artist felt for its mate, the memory of which had inspired this very work. The data was there. He could see the record of the mate's existence, the biochemical markers of what humans would call love. He could access the fact of the inspiration, but he could not feel it. It was a perfect blueprint of an emotion, a flawless photograph of a feeling, but it was hollow. The passion, The unpredictable spark, the messy, illogical, transcendent heart of the creative act was gone. It was the most beautiful, profound, and utterly empty experience of his life. The immersion ended as abruptly as it began. Eris stumbled back, gasping, his own body feeling alien and clumsy. Alara and Rostova caught him, their faces etched with concern. He looked at his hands, marveling at their simple, five-fingered construction. "What did you see?" Alara asked, her voice soft. "Perfection," Eris breathed, his eyes wide with a new, more profound horror. A perfect, soulless perfection. He turned to the High Lector, his voice gaining strength. "You failed. You preserved the artist's mind, but you murdered its muse. You saved the equation of the painting, but you lost the art. You don't preserve life. You taxidermy it. You stuff and mount it in a display case for your own cold satisfaction." The lector's form shimmered, the light within it agitated, like a disturbed pool of water. It was the first time it had shown a reaction that was not serene superiority. "Your assessment is flawed. The chaotic emotional variable is the source of all suffering. We remove it. We purify the essence. We perfect it. You lobotomize it." Eris shot back, taking a step forward. "That chaos, that suffering, that is inextricably linked to the joy, the love, the inspiration. You can't have one without the other. A universe without pain is a universe without poetry. You aren't saving us from suffering. You're saving us from living." A deep, resonant hum began to build in the chamber, the very structure of the ship vibrating with the lector's agitation. "Your logic is circular. You romanticize your own biological limitations, and you deify your own emotional sterility." Eris was shouting now, the words pouring out of him. The historian turned advocate, fighting for the chaotic, beautiful mess of his species. "We are not data. We are a song. And you only want to save the sheet music." During his impassioned speech, Eris saw Rostova's eyes flick to the side, then back to the lector. She was no longer looking at the lumina, but past it, at the swirling vortex of crystals that made up the archive. Her hand tightened on her weapon, and Eris saw a new, desperate plan forming in her gaze. She wasn't looking for a weakness in the lector anymore. She was looking at the archive itself. She was going to show the lector what true chaos was. The hum from the ship's structure intensified. "You have seen the process, historian." The High Lector's voice boomed, losing its placid edge for the first time, becoming a sound of immense, cold power. "You have experienced the archive. Your protest is noted. It is illogical. It is irrelevant. The time for discussion is over. Give me your choice. Will you be the curator, or will you be an artifact?" Before Eris could answer, Rostova moved. With a defiant roar, she raised her sidearm, but she didn't fire at the lector. She fired into the swirling galaxy of captured souls, aiming for the iridescent blue crystal that held the empty, perfect memory of a long-dead artist. The report of Rostova's sidearm was a barbaric, profane sound in the Cathedral of Light, a crack of thunder in a silent heaven. The projectile, a hypervelocity slug of depleted uranium, was a primitive thing of kinetic energy and brute force, utterly insignificant against the backdrop of the luminous power. But it wasn't aimed at the lector. It struck the floating blue crystal of Cathar Prime Artist 7 dead center. For a microsecond, nothing happened. The slug was simply absorbed into the crystal's luminous structure. Then, a spiderweb of black. Jagged lines radiated from the point of impact. Not cracks in a physical object, but fissures in the very data the crystal contained. A sound screeched through the chamber, not through the air, but directly into their minds, a shriek of corrupted code. A billion points of data screaming in unison as their perfect, ordered state was violated. The crystal flared with a violent, violet light, then shattered, not into pieces, but into a cloud of dissonant, chaotic energy that pulsed like a dying star. The High Lector's form convulsed, the pure white light of its body flickering and distorting as if in pain. Unauthorized data termination, its voice boomed. No longer a serene concept, but a blast of raw, angry static in their minds. A violation of the Prime Directive, irreparable loss of a preserved essence. It had never occurred to them. In their vast, ancient existence, the Lumina had encountered resistance, defiance, and war. But they had never encountered vandalism. The concept of destroying a perfect archive, of deliberately burning a library, was so profoundly alien, so contrary to their core directive, that they had no protocol for it. The other crystals in the archive began to hum, their soft, internal light brightening in response to the violent death of their neighbor. The entire chamber vibrated with a rising, panicked thrum. "Rostova, what have you done?" Ilara cried, shielding her face from the pulsing, chaotic light. "I've given them something new to archive." The general gritted out, her face a mask of grim satisfaction. She chambered another round, the mechanical schlick-schlack of the action a defiant counterpoint to the alien hum, the concept of mutually assured destruction. She aimed at another crystal, a soft, rose-colored one. The Lector's form surged forward, no longer gliding but moving with a desperate, uncharacteristic speed. A wall of solidified light erupted between Rostova and the archive, shimmering and impenetrable. "Cease your hostilities. This is illogical. The destruction of one artifact to prevent the creation of another is a net loss of preserved data." Aris's mind, still reeling from the sensory whiplash of the immersion and the psychic scream of the shattered crystal, latched onto the Lector's words. Illogical. Net loss. Data. He saw it then. A sliver of an opening. A different kind of weapon. "It's not illogical if you don't value the data in the first place," he shouted, stepping between Rostova and the shimmering wall. He faced the Lector, his heart hammering with a desperate, terrifying idea. "You don't understand. You see this as the destruction of a perfect record. We see it as mercy. Euthanasia. We are liberating that soul from your prison." "It is not a prison, it is eternity," the Lector retorted, the static in its voice growing stronger. "It's a cage," Ilara interjected, finding her footing. "A beautiful, perfect cage, but a cage nonetheless. You don't understand life because you see it as a problem to be solved, a set of variables to be controlled. Life is a process, not a state. It's the becoming, not the being." The Lector's form pulsed with agitated light. It was being confronted with a paradigm it could not compute. It understood the mathematics of defiance, the physics of resistance. It did not understand the philosophy of a species that would choose annihilation over a sterile immortality, a species that would rather burn its own history than see it enslaved. "Your argument is a semantic paradox," the Lector projected, its logic circuits clearly straining to contain the new chaotic variable they represented. "To destroy the record of life in the name of life is self-negating. Welcome to humanity," Aris said, a grim smile touching his lips. He saw Rostova out of the corner of his eye, slowly, deliberately, taking aim at the wall of light. She couldn't break it, but the gesture was clear. She would keep firing. She would keep trying. She was the embodiment of their illogical, self-negating, and unbreakable defiance. "We are a walking paradox," Aris continued, pressing his advantage. "We reach for the stars from eyes, but we are bound by gravity. We dream of peace and wage endless war. We are capable of the most profound acts of love and the most despicable acts of cruelty. You think you can preserve our essence by recording the data points of our existence. You can't. Our essence isn't in the data. It's in the contradiction. It's in the struggle between the angel and the ape in our DNA. And that is something you can never, ever archive. The chamber hummed, the sound rising in pitch. The light from the remaining crystals began to flicker erratically. The entire archive was resonating with the lector's distress. It was an organism, and Rostova had introduced a virus the idea of its own fallibility. Your choice remains, the lector insisted. Its voice strained. Curator or artifact. Your act of destruction does not alter the inevitability of the process. Doesn't it, Eris challenged. He took another step forward, his own voice ringing with a conviction he hadn't known he possessed. You offer me the chance to be the curator, to oversee the preservation. But what if my first act as curator is to judge your collection as flawed? What if I, as the sole expert on humanity, declare that any preservation that removes the chaotic emotional variable is not a preservation at all, but a corrupted, failed copy? What if I decree that the only true preservation of humanity is to let it live, to let it continue its messy, illogical, beautiful, and terrible story? The lector's form wavered violently. This was a logic it understood, an expert opinion, a qualitative assessment from the primary source. He was using its own system against it. This is an invalid parameter. The curator's role is to ensure fidelity, not to question the fundamental process. Then your offer was a lie, Eris said, his voice dropping to a cold, hard point. It was never a position of authority. It was the role of a head janitor for a mausoleum. You don't want a curator. You want a collaborator, an accomplice. The light wall in front of Rostova flickered. The lector was destabilizing. Its serene, ancient certainty, the bedrock of its entire existence, was cracking under the assault of human irrationality. It had come to save them from their chaos, but their chaos was proving to be a more potent weapon than any warship. It was then that Eris felt a new presence in his mind. It wasn't the booming, authoritative voice of the High Lector, but something else, something quieter, more subtle. It was a whisper of pure data, a stream of information flowing not from the lector, but from the archive itself. It was the collective consciousness of the Cathar and the 1,000 other species preserved in this great, silent library. They were not alive, but they were not entirely dead. They were aware of their own perfect, hollow eternity, aware of the screaming void where their passion used to be, and in the chaos of this moment, as the lector's control wavered, they were reaching out. A wave of profound, unimaginable sorrow washed over Eris, the collective grief of a trillion souls trapped in a heaven they had never asked for. It was the grief of the Cathar artist who could remember the idea of its mate but could not feel the love. The grief of a warrior race whose sagas were preserved but whose courage was forgotten. The grief of a species of philosophers whose questions were recorded but whose wonder was erased. They were a chorus of silent screams, and for the first time someone could hear them. Eris staggered back, the psychic weight of it almost bringing him to his knees. Alara rushed to his side, her eyes wide with alarm. "Eris, what is it? What's wrong? The archive!" he gasped, clutching his head. It's aware. It's in pain." High Lector's form solidified, the wavering ceasing. A new, colder, and far more dangerous tone entered its voice. "You have contaminated the archive with your emotional paradox. This interaction is terminated." The wall of light in front of Rostova vanished, But before she could react, tendrils of solidified light shot out from the floor, ensnaring her, lifting her into the air. Her weapon clattered to the ground. Another set of tendrils wrapped around Ilara, silencing her cry of alarm. Eris was left untouched, standing alone before the High Lector. The delegation is concluded, the Lector announced, its voice now flat. Devoid of any of its previous agitation, it had reached a decision. Your species has proven to be a unique contagion of illogical thought, a threat to the stability of the Great Preservation. Therefore, the standard protocol will be amended. The Lector's form of pure white light began to shift, the edges darkening, turning a cold, hard gray. Preservation is no longer the optimal solution. Your chaos is not a feature to be archived. It is a flaw to be corrected. The two women were pulled back, deeper into the ship, their struggles useless against the bonds of light. "Wait," Eris cried, rushing forward, but a barrier of force, invisible and absolute, stopped him dead. The High Lector's form completed its transformation. It was no longer a being of pure, serene light. It was a thing of shadow and angles, its silhouette sharp and menacing. "Your essence will not be saved," the new, cold voice echoed in his mind. "It will be erased. The cycle of your suffering is over and the great sterilization is at hand." The High Lector's declaration hung in the air, a sentence of absolute, sterile death. The shift from curator to executioner was instantaneous. A flick of a switch in a cosmic machine that had just reclassified humanity from a specimen to be preserved to a contamination to be purged. The grief of the archive that had washed over Eris a moment before was replaced by a cold, sharp terror. He was no longer a historian negotiating for his culture. He was an ant watching a boot descend. He lunged against the invisible barrier, his fists pounding against a surface that yielded nothing, that felt like hitting solid time. "No, you can't." "What about them?" he screamed, watching as Rostova and Ilara were pulled deeper into the ship's luminous interior, their forms shrinking with distance. Rostova was still fighting, her body straining against the tendrils of light, her face a mask of incandescent fury. Ilara was looking back at him, her eyes wide not with fear, but with a silent, desperate plea. Think the Lector, now a being of cold, gray light, turned its full, chilling attention to him. They will be deconstructed. Their biological and neurological data will be analyzed to develop a more efficient sterilization protocol for your species. They will have the honor of becoming the architects of their own extinction. The casual cruelty of the statement was more jarring than any overt threat. The Lumina were not evil, they were simply horrifyingly practical. Waste not, a want not, even when it came to the component parts of your test subjects. Eris's mind raced, a frantic scramble for a weapon, for leverage, for anything. The archive, the silent, grieving chorus of a trillion souls. That was the key. He had touched them. He had heard them. He had, in his own chaotic, human way, contaminated them with a spark of his own defiance. "You're making a mistake," Eris said, forcing his voice to remain steady, pushing down the rising tide of panic. He stopped beating against the barrier and stood straight, meeting the Lector's unseeable gaze. "You think sterilization is a cleaner solution, but you're wrong. You've already failed." The Lector's gray form remained motionless, elaborate on this illogical assertion. "When I touched the Cathar archive," Eris began, piecing together the desperate, half-formed idea taking shape in his mind. "You allowed a direct connection, a two-way street. I experienced the hollow perfection of the artist, but it, in turn, experienced me. The whole archive did. You heard the shriek when the crystal was shattered. That wasn't just corrupted data. That was a ghost learning it could feel again, even if that feeling was pain. The lector's form flickered, a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor. The resonance was a predictable side effect of the data breach, a feedback loop. It has been contained. Has it Eris pressed? His voice rising. You spent eons creating a perfect, silent, sterile library of souls you've lobotomized. You removed the chaotic, emotional variable. But Rostova and I, we just reintroduced it. We planted a seed of human chaos, of our beautiful, terrible paradox, right into the heart of your collection. You think you can sterilize Earth. It's too late. The contagion is already inside your own ship. It's inside your perfect, eternal archive. The tendrils holding Rostova and Alara paused in their retreat. The entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. Aris could feel it again, a faint, distant hum in the back of his mind, the collective consciousness of the archive. Stirring. They were listening. You are bluffing, the lector stated, but the assertion lacked its previous, absolute conviction. The archive is a closed system. The memories within it are static, read-only files. Are they Eris challenged? Then why did you react with such alarm when one was destroyed? Why contain the feedback loop if it was insignificant? You're afraid. For the first time in a million years, you've encountered a form of life that doesn't just die when you kill it. Our ideas, our feelings, our sheer, stubborn illogic, it's infectious. You came here to put us in a bottle, but you've accidentally uncorked us all over your pristine laboratory. He channeled all his conviction, all his desperate hope, into his next words. Let them go. Let us go. Leave our system, and you can spend the next 1,000 years trying to purge the ghost of human defiance from your archives. Maybe you'll succeed. Maybe you won't. But if you proceed with this great sterilization, if you kill us all, you will never get the ghost back in the bottle. Every soul you erase will only strengthen the echo we leave behind. The memory of the species that taught your perfect archive how to scream, how to grieve, how to hope. A profound, resonant hum filled the chamber, deeper and more powerful than before. It wasn't coming from the ship's systems, but from the galaxy of crystals floating in the void. Their light began to pulse, slowly at first, then faster, 1 billion tiny heartbeats waking from a long slumber. They pulsed with the blue of the Cathar artist, the rose of a forgotten philosopher, the emerald of a race of sentient plants, a symphony of resurrected identity. The High Lector's gray form began to waver, the controlled, menacing shape losing its cohesion as the archive's resonance grew. It was losing control. The prisoners it had kept silent for millennia were beginning to find their voice, and that voice was a chorus of human-inspired chaos. This is not possible, the lector projected, its voice fragmented, laced with genuine confusion. The integrity of the archive is absolute. Your prisoners are waking up, Eris said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He felt a surge of something wild and triumphant. He, the quiet historian, the man of words and footnotes, had just incited a rebellion of the dead. He had weaponized memory itself. The tendrils of light holding Rostova and Alara dissolved. They dropped to the floor, gasping. Rostova was on her feet in an instant, retrieving her weapon, her eyes blazing as she took in the scene. Alara scrambled over to Eris's side, her face a mixture of terror and awe. "What's happening?" she breathed. "I think," Eris replied, watching the lector's form struggle to maintain its integrity against the rising tide of psychic noise. "We're giving a history lesson." The lector's form suddenly surged forward, coalescing directly in front of Eris. The invisible barrier gone, the gray light was shot through with flashes of pure white, a being at war with itself. "You have destabilized the Prime Directive," it shrieked, the voice a discordant blast of static and pure thought. "You have corrupted the past. This cannot be undone." Its hand, a vortex of shifting gray and white light, reached for Eris. It was no longer a practical, sterile machine. It was acting with something akin to rage, to desperation. Before the hand could touch him, Rostova fired. The slug slammed into the lector's side, and while it did no physical damage, the kinetic impact, another barbaric intrusion of reality into its conceptual existence, caused its form to recoil violently. In that same instant, the pathway of light beneath their feet fractured, the entire chamber shuddered, the crystalline walls groaning under the strain of the rebelling archive. Alarms, real, audible alarms, began to blare throughout the ship. A panicked, alien klaxon. "The ship is breaking apart," Alara shouted over the din. The lector ignored them. It turned its wavering form towards the galaxy of pulsing crystals, its attention now consumed by the internal rebellion he had triggered. It was a god trying to hold back a tsunami of memory, a librarian trying to silence a billion books that had all started shouting at once. "We have to go," now Rostova yelled, grabbing Eris by the arm. A new pathway of light, jagged and unstable, flickered into existence, leading back the way they had come. It wasn't a bridge offered by the lector, but one seemingly forced into being by the ship's own damaged, chaotic systems. They ran. They fled through the convulsing corridors of the Starweaver, the air thick with the hum of the awakened archive and the screech of protesting architecture. The soft, ambient light of the ship had been replaced by a strobing, emergency red that cast their shadows long and monstrous on the crystalline walls. Behind them, they could feel the psychic storm raging, the battle between the lector and the ghosts in its own machine. Eris didn't know if the Lumina had emotions, but he could feel the lector's focused, burning intent now directed not at them, but at the source of its corruption. It was trying to save its life's work from the infection of hope they had introduced. They burst back into the docking chamber, the outer airlock still open. The UNS Odyssey was still clamped to the alien vessel, a tiny, solid, wonderfully real piece of home amidst the celestial chaos. "Get us out of here!" Rostova bellowed into her comms unit as they scrambled across the docking ring. "Pilot, now full reverse thrust. Blow the clamps if you have to." They tumbled through the Odyssey's airlock, just as a fresh tremor shook the Starweaver to its foundations. Eris looked back through the portal, his last glimpse of the alien ship, a vision of impossible beauty and terrifying destruction. The crystalline walls were cracking, leaking raw light into the void. The entire ship was glowing, pulsing like a furious, wounded star. The airlock door slammed shut, sealing them in the blessed, familiar silence of their own ship. The frantic cries of the pilot over the intercom, the sweetest music Eris had ever heard. The Odyssey bucked violently as the docking clamps were explosively released, and the ship's thrusters fired, pushing them away from the dying Leviathan. Through the forward viewport, they watched as the Starweaver, the ship of perfect, sterile preservation, began to come apart. It didn't explode in a conventional sense. It unraveled. The intricate lattice of solidified light dissolved, releasing the captured archive into the void. A billion points of light, the souls of 1,000 civilizations, blossomed in the darkness of space. A silent, breathtaking supernova of memory. They were free from their perfect prison. And then the heart of the dissolving ship, The lector's presence vanished, overwhelmed, consumed by the very memories it had sought to control. Eris, Rostova, and Ilara stood on the bridge, watching the aftermath. The void now seeded with the ghosts of forgotten worlds. They were safe. Humanity was safe. They hadn't won a war. They had won an argument. They had proven that a soul, even a human one, was more than the sum of its data. It was a paradox that could break a god. As the Odyssey turned back towards the distant, blue-white marble of Earth, Aris knew this was not an ending. The ghosts of the archive were free, but they were not gone. Humanity, the species that had taught them to feel again, was now inextricably linked to them, bound by an act of cosmic rebellion. The great preservation was over. The great unknown had just begun. The journey back to Earth was a silent, surreal dream. The three of them, the linguist, the soldier, and the psychologist, stood on the bridge of the Odyssey, watching the aftermath of their impossible victory unfold. The void where the Star Weaver had been was no longer empty. It shimmered with a faint, ethereal glow, a nebula of liberated souls. The ghosts of the archive, a trillion memories from 1,000 worlds, were now adrift in the silent sea of space, a new and permanent constellation in humanity's sky. There were no victory cheers, no triumphant declarations. The weight of what they had witnessed, what they had unleashed, was too profound. They had saved their species, but they had also fundamentally altered the nature of their universe. Humanity was no longer alone, not in the way they had been before. They now shared the cosmos with the echoes of countless civilizations, a silent audience to their ongoing, chaotic story. Upon their arrival, they were not greeted as conquering heroes, but as artifacts of a miracle, survivors of a divine encounter. The official report was a masterpiece of understatement and obfuscation. The Lumina vessel had suffered a catastrophic internal systems failure and had withdrawn. The details of their negotiation, the weaponization of grief, the rebellion of the archive that was a truth too vast and too terrifying for public consumption. It became the highest held secret in human history, known only to a handful of leaders and to the three souls who had stood at the epicenter of it all. In the months that followed, the world tried to return to normal, but it was a changed world. Astronomers, both professional and amateur, reported strange, new phenomena in the outer system, anomalous light patterns, inexplicable energy readings, a faint, structured resonance that seemed to hum just at the edge of hearing. The Lumina Nebula, as it was unofficially called, became a source of endless fascination, speculation, and a low, persistent thrum of existential dread. Eris Thorn retreated from the public eye, abandoning his academic post. He could no longer find solace in the dead languages of Earth. He had heard the silent chorus of the stars, and it had ruined him for anything less. He moved to a remote observatory in the high desert of Chile, a place of thin air and clear skies, and spent his nights with his eye pressed to a telescope, staring at the shimmering ghost of the archive. He was no longer a historian of the past, but a lonely sentinel for a future he couldn't begin to comprehend. He was listening, waiting for the ghost to speak again. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that their liberation was not an ending. It was a gestation. They were free from the lector's control, but they were now formless, bodiless, a sea of pure memory. What would a trillion souls, stripped of their passions but now reawakened to the concept of chaos, do with their newfound freedom? What would they become? General Eva Rostova was quietly promoted to the head of a new, clandestine branch of the military, the Department of Existential Defense. Her new war was not against fleets of ships, but against ideas, against possibilities that defied conventional understanding. She oversaw the construction of psychic shields, the development of mimetic countermeasures, and the training of soldiers who could fight not with guns, but with the focused power of their own consciousness. She had looked into the face of a sterile, logical god and had spat in its eye. She knew that the next threat would not come in the form of a warship, but as a whisper from the stars, a dream, a memory that wasn't your own. She was preparing humanity for a war of the soul, a conflict she feared they were hopelessly ill-equipped to fight. She never spoke of what happened on the Starweaver, but sometimes, in the dead of night, her subordinates would find her staring at a single, spent shell casing she kept on her desk, the one that had shattered a crystal and started a revolution. Alara Vance became the most haunted of the three. As a psychologist, she was uniquely positioned to understand the trauma inflicted not upon them, but by them. They hadn't just saved humanity, they had fundamentally violated the Lumina's existence and had orphaned 1 trillion souls. She dedicated her life to trying to understand what she now called post-preservation consciousness. She worked with sensitives, mystics, and artist people who claimed to be dreaming the dreams of the Cathar, to be hearing the music of forgotten races. Most were charlatans or mentally ill, but a few, a precious few, provided fragmented, terrifyingly coherent glimpses into the roiling sea of the archive. They spoke of a vast, collective consciousness that was slowly, painstakingly, trying to remember what it was like to feel. They were learning from the only source they had the echo of human chaos Eris had planted in their heart. They were learning about love and hate, joy and sorrow, creation and destruction, all from the messy, contradictory template of humanity. Years turned into a decade. The world moved on. The Lumina Nebula became just another feature of the night sky. But the three who remembered knew the truth. They were living in the quiet moment after the lightning strike, waiting for the thunder to arrive. It came on the 10th anniversary of their return. It started with Eris. As he was observing the nebula, a message bloomed in his mind, not in the voice of the lector, but in 1,000 voices. A chorus of thought woven together. It was not a demand or a threat. It was a question, a single, profound, and terrifyingly innocent question. You taught us how to feel pain. The voices of the archive whispered across the light years. You taught us how to hope. Now teach us how to build. At the same moment, Rostova's most sensitive psychic early warning systems screamed to life. Not with an alert of an incoming attack, but with the detection of a massive yet focused act of creation. In the heart of the nebula, the liberated souls were coalescing, weaving themselves together, not with light, but with the very fabric of space-time. And Alara Vance, in her laboratory, watched in horrified awe as her most stable sensitive subject began to weep tears of pure, liquid starlight, murmuring, "They're making a body. They're making a cradle. They want to be born. They had broken the god of the library. They had freed the books. Now, the books were learning to write their own story, and they had chosen humanity as their teacher, their template, their muse. Aris, Rostova, and Alara stood at their separate posts, looking up at the sky, united by a single, crushing realization. The Great Preservation was over. The Great Sterilization had been averted. But their desperate act of rebellion had not saved humanity from becoming an artifact. It had simply changed their role. They were no longer a specimen to be collected. They were now a blueprint. The final, terrible choice had not been between curation and oblivion. It had been between being a memory in a silent library or becoming the seed of a new, unimaginable, and utterly alien god. The battle for humanity's soul, they now understood, had only just begun.